Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that some stories and discussions in this episode of Radiant Resilience may touch on sensitive and potentially triggering topics. These may include themes of mental health struggles, including depression and anxiety, caregiving challenges, infertility and miscarriage, loss of a parent and spouse, navigating terminal illness, and grief and healing. Our goal is to share real-life experiences in a respectful and empathetic manner, offering insights into the complexities of the human spirit and the journey towards resilience. However, we understand that some content might be difficult for listeners. We encourage you to prioritize your well-being and discretion when deciding to listen. Please remember this podcast is not a substitute for professional advice or support. If you find yourself needing assistance, we urge you to seek help from qualified professionals or trusted support systems. Your mental and emotional health is important to us. Thank you for your courage and for joining us in a space of understanding and compassion. Welcome back, everyone, to Radiant Resilience. I have Debbie Weiss with me today. Debbie has over 60 years of experience dealing with some of life's toughest challenges. Debbie is an expert in chasing your own dreams in spite of your circumstances. She is the best-selling author of the memoir On Second Thought, Maybe I Can, as well as a co-author in the Amazon bestseller collaborative book, Heart Whispers. Debbie's most recent book, The Sprinkle Effect, A Guide to Living a More Colorful and Fulfilling Life, adds another vibrant chapter to her literary journey. In addition, Debbie is a Canfield certified trainer in the Success Principles, an entrepreneur running both an insurance agency and her online store, A Sprinkle of Hearts, host of the Maybe I Can podcast, inspirational speaker, family caregiver, and mother. Debbie has overcome her own limiting beliefs and fears, allowing her to begin to live her best life. Her life's passion is to help and inspire others to do the same. I love that bio. Welcome, Debbie. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for having me. And when I listen to you read it, I'm like, oh my goodness, it sounds a little much. And then I realized, oh, I guess it is all true.
Yeah, and you've done a lot, so you should be proud of that.
Thank you.
So Debbie's going to share a few different life stories with us today. I'm going to let you just take the reins and wherever you want to start in your journey, and we'll go from there.
Sounds good. So there's so many different things, but I don't know where to begin, but I'll start at 17. The day after I graduated from high school, my father, who had just turned 46, had a massive stroke and survived.
Oh, wow.
But he became permanently disabled.
Mm.
And he did live for 30 years. He passed away right before turning 76. Soon after he had the stroke, my parents divorced. And so I became my father's caregiver for the next 30 years of his life. Now,
starting at 17, or you said it was a couple years later?
Yeah, I was 17. I'll put it this way. I was 17. It did affect my college journey because I have one brother. He's 4 years younger. And so he was like 13, just turning 14 at the time. So forget him. He was obviously not caring for anyone. Mm. And I was always daddy's little girl. And he was my hero. And my parents had been having marital struggles, so it wasn't too crazy that this was happening. And so, not that my mother didn't care for him, because she did the right things and did what she had to do, but she didn't do it with the amount of care that I felt he should have. And so I had planned on going away to college, and I went, but it was extremely difficult because I was about 5 hours away from home. And my father, soon after I got to school, was having experimental brain surgery to reconnect the flow of blood from one part of the brain to the other. Wow. And my mother wouldn't let me come home.
Oh, no.
And now of course, that I'm a mother, actually a son who's a senior in college. I wouldn't want his life to be, I don't want to say ruined, but derailed.
Yeah.
And so now I understand why she didn't want that,
Mm.
but I couldn't handle it. And I wound up going home to see him in the hospital after the surgery a week later and whatnot. And he asked me to come home.
Mm.
Now, he never, if he was in his right mind, would have asked me, but
Yeah.
I just felt in my heart that he needed me and I needed to be there for him.
Mm.
So somehow my aunt, his sister, and I were able to convince my mother to allow me to do this. So
Okay.
I dropped out of the school.
Oh, wow.
I enrolled in a local university. I lived at home and attended school, worked part-time, and then took care of my father the rest of the time. So whether it was helping him with his physical therapy, we couldn't move his arm, or so I would have to manually move his arm, his leg, those kinds of things. I would help him take a shower. He'd wear a bathing suit and I would help bathe him. I was there for him.
Mm.
And I have to say, at that point in my life, so what am I, 18, 19? I started to feel like, oh gosh, this was it. I'm not having a college experience.
No, yeah.
And I decided that I needed to go away to school for the last 2 years. So I actually transferred to a third university.
Wow. I hope all your credits transferred.
I know. I feel like whenever anyone says, "Where'd you go to school?" I'm like, "Oh, don't ask that." I just say where I graduated from. It's very complicated. And then after I graduated from college, that's when my parents were officially divorced. That's when my mother found an independent living facility for my father, and I took over really full time from there. But in my 20s, I had to learn about things that you don't have to know about. I don't know anything about Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and private disability and all these things.
Yeah. Because
So
why would you have
yeah,
otherwise needed to know that? That's
yeah,
crazy. So
yeah.
do you know what caused the stroke? Was it random or?
It was his carotid arteries in his
Okay.
neck. One was completely closed and the other was like 90%.
Oh,
So
wow.
when one is completely closed, they can't do anything about it. When you have some opening, this is 40 years ago,
Yeah.
they can roto-rooter it. You know what I mean? They can
Okay.
clean it out. But back then, once it was 100% blocked, that was it. They can't do anything. So 100% blocked, then it loses the blood flow to the brain.
So did that mean that he was at risk for another one at any time as well, or?
So for a long time, he in the beginning, he had some seizures, then he was on anti-seizure medication.
Yeah.
He wasn't at risk because then for the other side, now that we were aware of it, he
Mm,
was always having it checked and he did like twice, I think, have to have it cleared.
okay. Oh
Yeah.
man. So then you come back from college and you jumped right back into taking care of him again?
Oh, yeah. And so I'm originally from New York, from Long Island. Back then, nowadays there's an independent living facility or
Right.
different types everywhere. Back then there were not.
Ugh.
And so the only place my mother could find for him was in New Jersey, which with no traffic, which if you're from the New York area, there is never no traffic. With no traffic, it was like, I don't know, hour and 15 minutes.
Oh, wow.
With traffic, you never know.
Yeah.
But where he was luckily close to my aunt, his sister.
Okay.
So in a pinch, like in an emergency, she could be there.
Hmm.
But it was my responsibility to, like I said, do everything. I would go every few weeks when he lived that far away and bring him groceries to have, take him to doctor's appointments, take him, if it's a holiday, pick him up, take him to probably my aunt's house and bring him back and then go back to Long Island. It was just my job. And I actually have never told this story on a podcast because it's a bit much. But all right, he's 50 by this time, let's say. And he moves into one of these places, everybody's 80.
Yeah.
So that's awkward. They're even older than his parents.
Yeah.
So he winds up meeting a woman who maybe she was like in her 60s,
Okay.
and they start having a relationship.
Oh,
And you know how you just get that feeling about people?
yeah. Oh
And
no.
and it didn't matter. He found her and he wanted to get married. And I'm like, no. And in the end, I couldn't stop him from getting married. And I said, okay, get married, but stay here.
Yeah.
And she wanted to move out of the
Mhm.
facility, that she would take care of him.
Oh,
So they move into a nice, I don't want to say apartment, let's just say like a townhouse.
okay.
And soon she starts verbally abusing him.
Oh no.
It was just about the time that like Home Shopping Network and QVC and all of that started. She
Hmm.
thought he had money, but he didn't have money.
Oh,
She charged up his credit cards, bought everything under the sun, rooms of hoarding stuff that she just bought. And he was still, actually, he had moved a little further south in New Jersey, which was further away from me.
hmm.
And he would call me crying.
Oh,
And like she was a psycho. And I was afraid of her, afraid of the repercussions if he said he wanted out.
yeah.
And now I'm 25 and I know that for whatever reason. And my cousin, my friend, who's my friend, she and I devised a plan to kidnap him when she was gone for the day.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so I had to find a place for him to live before I could kidnap him because I had to take him somewhere.
Yeah.
So luckily, then I found a place actually right around the block from where I lived, and it was
Oh
really nice. So it
wow.
couldn't have been better. But now I didn't want the woman to know
Right.
where he was. So my brother and his friends come, my cousin and myself, and I take my father. And again, this is like back in the day, people probably don't even know that you had to do this. You had to like physically go to the post office and fill out a form and say you were,
Yep.
moving. And like I had to physically go to a bank and close out his bank account.
Oh
So I
wow.
took him to go do all those things and then to take him to this new place where he had never seen or anything. And my cousin and my brother moved whatever stuff was his.
Wow.
And my cousin left a note, and I still can never imagine what this woman thought when she came home to find half of everything gone and my father not
You
there.
guys never heard from her again?
I think
Oh.
years later, my father said that she called him,
Mm-hmm.
but it was so many years later, a lot of years later. I don't
Yeah.
think they ever spoke, but no, at the time, and we're kids, we're all paranoid, like she's gonna
Yeah.
come get us and hunt us down. But thank goodness it was like there was no online. You couldn't just look someone up.
It wasn't as easy as it is now.
No.
Oh my gosh. So did they get divorced then? Or did they
Oh,
just,
so that's the other part of the story. I had to figure out how to get him divorced. I
oh
didn't even have a
no.
boyfriend.
You're 25 years old doing all of that?
And the attorney had to be in New Jersey. And again, no Zoom, no nothing. Every time that he needed to see her or sign something with a notary, I would basically have to take off work and drive him to New Jersey. Oh, it was so
Oh.
crazy. So
And you
crazy.
were working during all of this too.
Oh yeah. Sure, I lived alone,
Oh
you
my
know,
gosh. You
living.
became the parent of your parents, which I think happens to all of us eventually, but you expect it to happen way further down the road when you've already got a life that's established. So it's a lot easier for you to help out. But wow.
Yeah, that whole thing was, I can vivid memories. It was like a whole operation. We had a whole operation going on.
In
Good
some
for
of
us.
those abusive situations, you have to do those types of things. And was probably way better off once you got him
Oh,
out of there, but he couldn't do that himself, right?
oh, no,
Yeah.
he couldn't drive. He had lost the use of his left arm. Luckily, he had regained the use of his left leg, walking slowly with a 4-prong cane. But he later on in life, he also had a jazzy that he really got around in the buildings that he lived in. Then the problem became he didn't have any money.
Because she drained him.
Yep.
Oh my gosh.
And I had to fight with credit cards. I could write a TV show about everything that went on with him. It wasn't just your normal caregiving. It was a lot of antics, things that I had to deal with that I never had. Back then, there were 900 numbers that don't exist now for money. And of course, they would prey on people like him.
Yeah.
And so it was like the psychic hotline or something. And I don't remember exactly how it worked because I never went on it, but I think like you spoke for a minute and then like when it beeped, they started charging you.
Oh, wow.
So he was using it as therapy.
Oh,
All of a sudden he gets a bill, $3,000 for 1
what?
month.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I learned how to fight the phone company back then. Wasn't as
Yeah.
easy to get it removed as it would be now, probably.
Wow. Looking back on all of this, did you take care of him until
Yeah.
the very end?
Oh, yeah.
When he passed?
Yep.
Wow.
I had to move him several times. I probably had to move him that one time. Then he probably lived in 3 different places after that. And in the end, once he turned 65, he lost his private disability. And I was supplementing him by that point, a couple $100 a month. But this was a heck of a lot more. So I had to find a place that was basically low income housing.
Yeah. So looking back on all of this
Yes.
now,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts like about what you went through, about what you sacrificed, about all of that?
It's so easy to say it looking back now because I never realized it. But I think just so many difficult things that we go through, it did give me many gifts. So looking back in a positive way, I've always struggled with my weight. And when I was a little girl, people were judging me. Oh, she has such a pretty face. Like, it's such a shame.
Oh,
Yeah. And a whole bunch. It's like, literally, I'm going to write a whole book on this. And point being that I never wanted to be seen because when I was seen, then I was judged. So I would never speak up. And what I found was having to care for my father and advocate on his behalf helped me to find my voice because I wasn't going to let him suffer because of my insecurity, because I felt so strongly about it. And it like forced me to get over my fear.
Wow.
And so the fact that I was so timid and I had to do all those things that I just told you in my 20s, it honestly, it's like whatever we go through, it made me who I am today.
Yeah.
So on the flip side, I was resentful. I definitely grew resentful. Why me? It was never ending. The other thing my father used to do, and this is before caller ID, because when caller ID happened, we were like, we hit the jackpot. This is awesome.
Yeah.
He would call incessantly. Any thought that was in his head, he would call, Debbie, I need crackers. Okay, write a list. No, so whatever he needed, he just would keep calling me. Or then he was lonely.
Yeah.
And he was worried about, he would perseverate on the things that he needed done or he needed bought. And until he passed it on to me, he couldn't get it out of his head. So this is what he did. It's like harassment. And I would not be nice.
Yeah.
I would definitely be yelling. I was quick to anger, depending on where I was in my life with my other stressors, because I had a lot of other stressors going on as well. It would really depend how I showed up for him.
Yeah.
And so in hindsight, it took me 30 years to realize that even though I'm taking care of him and then taking care of other people, I have to take care of myself first. And I I didn't know that. I didn't think that. I thought that was selfish. I've got my needs were on the bottom of the list.
Mm.
And what I found was once I became aware of how important it was, then I saw that then I became a better caregiver because I relieved a lot of my stress and I showed up as
Yeah.
a different person.
Oh, wow. So did you figure that out while he was still alive or after the fact?
I started to figure it out while he was still alive.
Okay.
And the last several years of his life, oh, I forgot. We had that move too. That was another move. He lived in a
Oh.
nursing home. He
Mhm.
lived in a nursing home that was about 25 minutes from where I live.
Mhm.
And when he started to have problems, when I knew that it was probably under a year that he was going to live, my attitude was able to change. And at a point where I thought anything could happen the next day, but he was still alert, I was leaving work every day and going every day.
Oh,
And I
wow.
had kids at that point. I had a business, like there was, but I showed up a much better person near the end.
Yeah. Oh, that's super interesting because you think that you have to pour your heart and soul and everything, every part of your being into caring for this person because, like you said, if you don't, you're selfish. But the reality is you gotta take care of yourself too. I think that's true in a lot of aspects of life. We will show up better people in this world when we're taking care of ourselves as well.
Absolutely. No question about it. It's so cliche, but it's that same like oxygen mask analogy, right? You got to
Yeah.
put your oxygen mask on first before you help your child
Yeah.
because you won't be able to breathe. And that's what
Yeah.
happened. I couldn't breathe. The stress, what I was going through. I have two sons. I went through a lot of infertility
Mm.
challenges. I did
Very
eventually, I
sorry.
was successful. And I have two sons, but at two, my oldest son was diagnosed on the autism spectrum.
Okay.
And I still had my dad was still alive. And to have that was so difficult
Mhm.
because that was learning something else that was completely new and foreign to me, learning how to navigate the laws at the school district, how it all works, what he needs, different therapies, oh, so many different things. But then still having my father. And then at that point, I had my own insurance agency, and my younger son is 21 months younger. So I had him too.
Oh, wow.
So that was when I would say,
Drowning a bit.
yeah, oh yeah.
Oh man. Yeah, that's a lot. And how old were you at that point?
I had my kids late, so I was 37 and 39. So I was around 40 when he first got diagnosed.
Yeah, but still, that's a lot for any age to be
Yeah,
taking on.
exactly.
So, oh man. Wow. I don't know if you know this, but I also struggled with infertility. So I am really sorry that you had to go through all of that as well, on top of everything you were already going through, because it's really hard. So,
It's really hard. Am I allowed to ask about your journey?
oh yeah, sure. A lot of my listeners have probably already heard it a few times, but yeah, I 8+ years of infertility treatments. I did IVF. I had 5 egg retrievals and about 8 or 9 embryo transfers, all unsuccessful. I did IVF in Turkey as well and was still unsuccessful there just because it was cheaper. I got tired of spending the 20,000 plus dollars around here. And yeah, and I was never successful. So I'm currently in a phase of healing from it. It's been actually this weekend will be a year from my last embryo transfer. Just trying to figure out, I don't know what's next. I don't really want to do fertility treatments anymore. Haven't ruled out adoption or other things as well yet, but just trying to heal from it all because it's been a long, hard journey that wrecked my heart and soul for a long time. So,
Totally. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
mhm.
It's funny because I think I barely bring that up
Mhm.
because I don't know why, because I
Mhm.
guess the caregiver stuff and widow and
Yeah.
all that. But did they find something? Did they know the reason that it wasn't successful? They don't even know the reason.
No, we're unexplained infertility is our
That's
official
even worse.
diagnosis. But I have my own theories just based on looking at the data from all my egg retrievals and transfers. And I think there's definitely an egg quality issue there. And then
That was my issue.
I think I also have, I would classify myself, I think I have adenomyosis, which is endometriosis on the inside of the uterus because I've never been able to get an embryo to even implant. And then I have horribly painful periods. Yeah, it's not normal. It's not okay. There's obviously something wrong. And I think my husband and I pulled birth control over 10 years ago, and I've never seen a positive pregnancy test. There's obviously something wrong, but they can't seem to figure out what it is. So
Oh my
I actually
gosh.
was considering going and talking to a reproductive immunologist because that's a new thing that's up and coming, that our immune
Mhm.
systems are attacking these embryos before they can even become babies. And so, yeah, so I've been looking into that, but it's a really expensive road to go because I'm self-employed and health insurance is expensive. And yeah, it's all, so we'll see. I want to explore that route, but I'm also afraid of wanting it still,
I
to be
know.
honest.
Come on. I don't know how. I just so want to cry because it
Oh,
was just the hardest thing. It was the
hmm
hardest thing. And that roller coaster
hmm
of every day finding out either what my numbers were. And then for me, it was egg quality. They
hmm
were able to tell that it was something, it was I can't remember exactly what it was, but it had something to do with a lack of or something of inhibin B. That
Mm.
was the name of the I don't even know. Actually, my doctor was interviewed for a local New York show,
Oh, wow.
and he needed to have patients, and it was on this topic,
Yeah.
and I was the patient. But just first of all, the whole physical thing of it sucks.
hmm hmm
But the roller coaster, when you're waiting, you're hopeful, you're waiting, you're hopeful. And then for me, it was egg quality. So every day, and I don't know how it works anymore, that back then it was like 5 days, I think, before from the time you had the retrieval to the time you had the transfer there. And every day, and I hardly had any eggs because that was the problem.
Mm.
And back then they couldn't test quality they couldn't test
Right.
anything.
They weren't doing the genetic testing on the
That's
embryos.
right. There was
Hmm
nothing like that. And it was okay. We got six, only four fertilized. Then they call the next day, only three are alive. That kind of thing. And
Yeah.
then, of course, the retrieval and waiting. When can I take a pregnancy test? When can I take a pregnancy test? And then you get the
Yeah.
phone call, and it is so devastating.
Yeah, I always got a lot of eggs retrieved, and then our fertilization rates were always pretty good. So that's why I don't think it's really a sperm issue. And then we would lose almost all of those embryos by day 5. I had several rounds where I ended with 1 or 2 embryos after all of that. And one of the things that people used to say to me all the time was, it only takes one. You just need, I'm like, no, it does not. Because if that one doesn't work, I have to do this all over again. I have to start from square one. And it's so exhausting. It's absolutely draining and all the waiting. And now if you do the genetic testing, you have to wait another like 2 weeks after those 5 days to get your genetic testing
Uh,
results back. And then you do your transfer, and then you have to wait the next 2 weeks for them to
for
tell
the
you if it even
result.
worked. And it's just, yeah. And that's what going through that over and over and over is so traumatizing. You have to start over with your healing emotions every single time.
Every time.
And
Well,
it's draining.
yeah, yeah. It's so let me just tell you little something. So after I had my oldest son, he was the third try. I think each time I had like maybe three or four to be transferred back. And 6 months later, I went back to try for number two, and he said, "Oh, my numbers have really just in that short amount of time gotten so much worse." So we try once, I don't get pregnant. The next time, I don't even have enough eggs to retrieve.
Mm,
And so he said, "We'll try one more time. I'm going to give you the maximum dose of medication that I can.
mm-hmm.
And, but this is it."
Oh my goodness.
So I am already thinking, and he already spoke to me about donor eggs
Yeah.
and adoption. And I was like trying to process this. And we go for now this is like my sixth time in total. And I don't even remember what they were able to retrieve. Not many. I think whatever the lowest was, 4, let's
Mhm.
say. And I was down to 1 the day before the retrieval. And I was trying to prepare myself, and I ordered adoption books and
Mm.
started again. There was no internet then.
Yep.
And they put the 1 back in, and
Mm.
now turned 22.
Oh, wow. So 20, that was your first son, you said?
Second one,
Second one. So 22 years ago. Yeah, it's so interesting how
just
different
1. So
it is.
I had failed all those other times.
Yeah,
So
it's
you just,
crazy.
yeah,
And
you
that's what
just,
I think, it's so unpredictable, our
yes,
fertility in general, because then you have random people who get pregnant. Like I had a client years ago who had 2 daughters, tried for a third, was unsuccessful. Her oldest daughter was 17, and this woman was in her early 40s and got pregnant randomly after 20 years of it not happening, and they just decided they weren't going to pursue anything, but they weren't preventing those because they're like, well,
exactly.
it's just not going to happen. 20, almost 20 years later, she does end up pregnant. It's so wild, and every body is so different, and it's crazy. But I can't imagine 20 years ago IVF, how different it is
Yeah, I'm
from
sure.
now
Well, wait,
even.
I know. So I had never gotten pregnant in my life on
Mm-hmm.
my own. It's not like I was pregnant and had a miscarriage or anything. When my youngest son was 2, I
Mm-hmm.
got pregnant.
Oh, wow.
Also the same thing. I was in my early 40s and I was flipping out. Like, how is this even possible?
Yeah.
And I went to my infertility doctor. I'm like, how is this possible? How is this possible? And he said, especially because of what my issue was, that the hormonal change in perimenopause or menopause gives you a boost of some of the things I was lacking. That's why now
Interesting.
they used to call them change of life babies, but that's why it happens. And so I went back to him, but he said to me, look, Deb, based on your history, there's like a 95% chance you will have a miscarriage and not have this
Mhm.
baby. He said, but we'll take progesterone shots and you come back every week and check the progress. And so I would go back, and now the whole week, my the heart is in my mouth. I'm just dying every time to have the ultrasound. And I progressed. There was a heartbeat. It was growing. Like I was 10 or 11 weeks pregnant.
Mhm.
And he goes, I don't get it. You are a miracle. Now it's a 95% chance you're going to go full term.
Oh,
So he releases me,
okay.
turns me
Yeah,
over
to
to
the
the
OB.
OB.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even, my husband doesn't come to the appointment. We've been going, and the appointment is like an hour from where I am because that's how far I used to have to travel to get to my doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, Deb, there's no heartbeat.
Oh,
And I had to have a DNC.
oh my
And
gosh.
it was that actually also really, it's like anything, right? You don't know what it's like till you experience it yourself.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking to myself, and I hate to admit this, certainly when I didn't have children, at least you got pregnant. You know what I
Mm.
mean? If someone would have a miscarriage,
Yeah.
or, oh, you were only pregnant for a minute. I'm not saying that you're not upset, but it was devastating. It was
I
devastating.
did a little bit of that before I went through my infertility journey. I cringe now at saying some of those things and thinking some of those things. And now full transparency, I struggle with people who have had kids because if
Exactly.
they are trying for a second and struggling with that, I'm like, I got one.
Yeah,
Just
yeah. At least you
so bad, but it's so honest. Like I'm like, wow.
even now that this many years later, my
Yeah.
cousin's 2 daughters, they look at their husbands and they're pregnant. My cousin
Oh.
was like that too. And
Mhm.
even now, that still pisses me off.
I have heard that from so many people who had success, right? Through all the infertility stuff. They are still, there's resentment there a little bit for the people who have not had to have that struggle because it was such a dark, horrible journey to have to go through. And not that we want anybody else to struggle with that. I think what it is that you just want people to understand. You want people to have some empathy and understand where you're coming from. And those people have no clue. They really don't.
No
They're so
clue.
blessed. And even now in the world that I'm in now, I've heard stories of one of my very dear friends who's been on this podcast several times. She had a stillborn. She went through IVF, all the things, had a stillborn and never ever ended up having another baby. And then I hear those stories and I'm just like, oh my gosh, whoever is able to get pregnant, stay pregnant, and have a healthy birth is so blessed, and they have no idea a lot of the times how blessed they are. Because it's wild to see that it is such a struggle, because we look at movies and we read books and it's no problem. Actually, my husband and I are going through a phase right now. We're watching the Godfather movies. I've never watched any of them. And it's the same thing. All those people are popping out babies in the 70s.
Yeah.
Like it was no big deal. I think they had 4 or 5 children in each family. And I'm just like, what? How? But that is how we have shown the world how it works. And especially nowadays, it's becoming more and more difficult.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
I send you a lot of love and a lot of
Thank
hugs
you.
because I
Thank
feel
you.
you.
Yeah,
I feel you.
it's tough. That was a bit of a tangent, but I'm glad that we
Okay.
went on that
Okay,
because
good.
I do have a lot of infertility listeners.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so I would love to transition into your next story about your husband. Tell me about
Mhm.
that.
Yeah. So my husband was 6 years older than I was, and he and I actually worked together.
Okay.
Don't try it. I don't recommend it. But it took us.
I did actually. My husband and I owned a restaurant together, and
Oh, really? Oh my
it was
gosh.
fine, but it was a struggle
Yeah.
sometimes.
And we each came from like totally separate careers.
Oh
This
wow.
opportunity came up. We knew nothing about insurance and we did this together. The technicality is it's only my insurance agency. It's just the way it had to work with the insurance company. And it took us like the first 2 years to really, like, he quit or I fired him like 6 or 7 times in 2 years. But once we figured it out, it was the best thing that ever happened because it did allow flexibility in all my stating all of what I had to do. If I was not self-employed, I couldn't leave in the middle of the day to visit my father or to take my son to therapy, or so it afforded us so much. And the fact that we did it together, I knew that he was there. Like,
Yeah.
as long as one of us was there, I felt comfortable.
Yeah.
So around when he turned 50, I remember a couple of years later joking all the time, like he was going through male menopause.
Hmm.
He got crankier. He never took care of himself, so he always had health issues, but of course, they just seemed to be getting worse. And I'm trying to think, probably for about a decade.
Oh wow.
And then I noticed that at work, things started slipping through the
Oh
cracks.
no.
And that made it really difficult. That made it really difficult when somebody would call up to complain about Gary, and it's my husband. It wasn't great.
Yeah.
And he also wasn't like at home. So he was the cook. He did the food shopping. That's what he loved. I had no interest. I hated it. I was thrilled. That's probably why we were brought together. He loved it. I hated it. So that was always his domain. All of a sudden, it was like food shopping was a hobby, not something he just did. Like, he loved it. He went to 3 stores in a day. Like, who needs to go to 3 supermarkets? But he
That's
did.
so funny.
But then he stopped. And
Oh.
then it turned into, Gary, you're going to go food shopping? And I didn't realize then, but he was really slipping into a depression, a clinical depression,
Oh.
and also suffering from anxiety.
Mm.
We would drive separately because our schedules were different. And sometimes he would call me and say, I had to pull over to get sick.
Oh.
And he had Crohn's disease. So I was like, something with your medication, I'm thinking it's a GI thing. But after the fact, I realized it was all anxiety.
Oh no.
And one day he walked out of the office and said, I'm never coming back here. Not to my home, not divorcing, but he's never working again. I said, oh, okay. And he also had ADHD. He had stacks of papers on his desk like this. And I
Mm-hmm.
said, what do I do? Who do I have to call? You have to just tell me what to do. I'll bring the stuff home if you don't want to come back in here. And he said, nope. And so he really left me hanging there
Oh man.
because we had divided roles. So
Yeah.
I didn't know his role.
Yeah.
And nobody else, we all knew a little bit, but not really. And it was awful. It was awful. And then I said to myself, okay, at least maybe he won't have the stress of the office. So at home, he'll be back to normal. But
Sure.
he wasn't. He
Oh,
just kept plummeting and plummeting. The health issues kept happening. I kept calling doctors and making appointments for him. And then I would try to call him to make sure he was going, and he'd be sleeping. Or
oh,
he'd get on the phone and go, yeah, leave me alone. I'm not going today. And so then I'd spend all my time making appointments, canceling appointments, rescheduling appointments, being annoyed at him, coming home from work just to make sure he's okay if he's not answering the phone. Like it, and that lasted for several years. He also, at that point, he wasn't socializing. He and I would not go out to dinner, or he wouldn't come to holidays
oh
with my
man.
kids. We didn't celebrate as a family. And it was a really hard time. And my oldest son, who was originally diagnosed on the spectrum, he also later on was diagnosed with anxiety and depression.
Oh wow.
And so we went through a very difficult time that my son prefers I not speak about.
Mhm.
But I think that trauma sent my husband over the edge.
Oh.
And eventually I was able to get him into a psychiatric hospital. Actually, it was a psychiatric unit in our local hospital.
Okay.
And mental health, something else now that I should have a degree in, but you don't
Yeah.
just like, if someone doesn't agree, it's very hard to get them involuntarily committed into the hospital, but I did. And he came out. So this is like May of 2022. And he came out of the hospitalization. I don't want to say back to his old self, almost happier than his old self, a new lease on life.
Okay.
He still was like timid and like nervous and hard to explain, but yet he was hopeful. He was like the leader of his therapy groups, where he never even would agree to go to therapy before. And now he's hopping everybody on the bandwagon, helping everyone. I'm like, who are you? It was
How long was he in the hospital for?
not long.
Okay.
That first time he was only there for about a week or 10 days.
Oh
It
wow.
was a
Yeah.
medication switch. It was just a
Oh.
medication switch that did it.
Okay.
And 6 weeks later, he was diagnosed with terminal blood cancer out of the blue.
Oh my gosh.
It was like such an awful twist of fate,
Oh my
you know?
gosh.
And for the first couple of weeks, he tried to maintain that happy momentum, but it quickly faded. And honestly, the depression, he was hospital. I had to have him involuntarily committed
Mhm.
again, and it was not a good experience. And he was gone. He was gone for about a month. And when he came home, he died 4 weeks later.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So the end was not obviously, it obviously is never great, but I would say that the mental illness part of the whole thing was harder than anything else for
Mm.
me and for him, for all of us, my kids.
I'm so
Horrible.
sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Thank you. Yeah.
We, I think that talking more and more about mental illness in society, and there is becoming more and more awareness about it.
Yes.
But I think also the world we're living in, our mental health is getting worse and worse in general so than it used to be. Or maybe, like I said, people just didn't talk about it back then.
Yeah.
It was hidden. It wasn't. I actually just did an interview the other day with a gal who her dad committed suicide. And so we talked about all that too. And that was back in when she was a teenager, and it was really not talked about. And it was like,
Yeah.
nope, you hide that because we do not want to be seen as the family who has mental illness in
Of
our
course.
household. That is not okay, because
Not
that was frowned
okay.
upon. And I'm glad that we've made the leaps and bounds that we have, but I think we still have so far to go still.
Oh, yeah. And the whole system is
Mhm.
just, it's horrific and it's not helpful for anyone. It really isn't. You have to be lucky, I think, and talk about really needing someone to advocate for you while this is all going
Really?
down. But then
Yeah.
part of it is legal too. So it's tricky. It's very tricky. And I think what I've seen is the medications are, if you have high cholesterol, okay, here's a handful of medications and one's going to work and not give you a side effect. Here, it's being a scientist. And both my husband and my son still, they were on a cocktail. You know
Wow.
what I'm saying? They had 4 or 5 meds they were taking every day. Did it work for a little while? Possibly. But then what is it? Is it medication number one? Is it too much? Is it too little?
Mm,
You can't move the other. So I'm talking to have to play with them
yeah.
slowly, one by one. You don't just cut one out. Now we're going to go down 10 milligrams for 2 weeks. And then if that does, it is a drawn out, horrible process. And you could do all of that and they're worse.
Oh man. And then you're playing with fire there, right?
Yes.
If they get worse, because then you are running the risk of suicide and things like that. And
Yeah.
do you
Different.
have very mixed feelings on the medication side of all of that then, or?
When it works, I see the benefit
Sure.
and my son definitely benefits for
Yeah.
sure. It doesn't fix everything,
Mm.
unfortunately. And you always wonder, could it be better? Maybe
Mm.
this isn't the right mix. Maybe if he was on this and not this,
Mm.
that would be better. And actually, he was just telling me that his psychiatrist wanted to try something and he won't do it. And I understand because he's afraid.
Yeah.
Because you
Because if
can
it
really,
doesn't work, then
and
you're
then
in that dark
you
place again.
exactly. It's like the devil I know, I'll just stay here unless it
Yeah.
gets really bad.
Yeah.
So it's a rough road. It really is.
Oh, I'm so sorry. You have lived so many lives and so many. I'm truly amazed by you to be able to have done all of the things that you have done. And then all at the same time, you're dealing with taking care of your dad, taking care of your kids, taking care of your business, taking care of your husband. I'm sure they all fluctuated
Yes.
throughout, but to do all of that, how are you now looking back on all of that? And what does
So,
your life look like now? Because we know your dad passed, your husband
yes,
passed.
yes.
So how are you now?
So it was for me around 50 that I had an aha moment that I realized I should be taking care of myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know what that looked like. So since that time, and I'm 61 now, since that time, I've slowly made changes and I've learned so much about myself and about my journey in life. I didn't know what I wanted. And so I've been on this path of self-discovery.
Mm-hmm.
And in addition, I still have my insurance agency, but in addition, I wanted to do something more meaningful. And so I originally decided to launch an online business called the Caregiver Support Squad to help caregivers learn to prioritize their self-care.
Oh, I love
And
that.
I loved it too. I had the cutest logo. Oh, I loved everything about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I started working with women, it was very hard for them, and I totally get this, to just conflate and tell their story. And it wasn't a therapy session. I'm not a therapist. I was just here to come up with a self-care plan and help you implement it.
Mm-hmm.
And since I was going through my own caregiving journey and I'm empathetic, I couldn't handle it. And
Mm.
so I made the decision to pivot and broaden my message, because I had at 50, besides the fact that I was 50, I realized that I had felt sorry for myself because of all the reasons that we just discussed. I felt sorry for myself. And it was then that I realized everyone has stuff. It just
Yes.
looks different.
Yep.
This isn't, oh, how many? Oh, yours is worth 8 points and mine's worth 10. No, this is
Yeah.
not a game. Everyone has stuff. So stop feeling sorry for yourself. In the end, I'm responsible for my life, regardless of what happens. When something like anything happens, I determine how I'm going to respond to it.
Yeah.
And I was so busy blaming everything, everyone. I never looked in the mirror.
Mm.
And it's hard. It's
Yeah.
hard. But
Yeah.
yet, then it's empowering, because that's when I realized, oh, regardless of these circumstances, I can still make a change.
Yeah.
And so I slowly started, like I said, making some different shifts. And my message then became letting all people know, or really geared towards women, all women know that regardless of what's going on in your life, you still have control. When you're the captain of your ship,
Yeah.
and you can change. And I could never have guessed that I'd be sitting here talking to you
Mm.
just 3 or 4 years ago. I don't know if I would know it. And I never, ever would have guessed that I would write books. I don't want to write books.
You mean you didn't go to college to learn how to write a book?
No,
Yeah.
I went to college to become an accountant. Accountants don't write
And you
books.
didn't even do that either.
I did that for 10 years. That was
Okay.
my
Okay.
first career. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
People would hear my story, and you know how everyone's, oh, you should write a book. I
I
say
said all
that
the
all the
time too.
time, right? You should write a book. That kind of kept coming up. And I
Mm.
kept thinking, maybe they're right. Maybe it would be helpful to people, except I don't know how to write. So what do? You hire a ghostwriter? Like, how does that work? I don't
Yeah.
know anything about it. That's what I figured. And one day I was listening to a podcast that I don't listen to regularly, and she was interviewing a woman who helped first-time authors get their stories out there. And
Oh,
I thought, is this the universe telling me, like, this woman can help you? Let
yeah.
me find out. So I contacted her, and I really liked her. And she was starting a 12-week class for first-time authors. And I thought, oh, this is perfect. Except I was scared. I
Sure.
had my head. Everyone else, they've always wanted to write. I don't know. Not me.
Imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, big time. I still suffer from it when it
Think
comes
we
to
all
writing.
do. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very hard.
That's a hard one to overcome for sure.
It is. And so I'm considering joining the group. And then my husband gets the diagnosis.
Oh,
And I was speaking to a therapist at the time, and I said to the therapist, oh my gosh, I shouldn't even be mentioning this. This feels so selfish at a time like this. And I blah, blah, blah. I tell her the whole thing. And she says, I disagree with you. This is the perfect time for you to take this course,
oh, okay.
because you will need something separate from whatever is going on in your life. And I said, what if I can't show up one week because what's going on? What if there's homework and I don't do it? And she's, who cares?
Mm.
And that kind of gave me permission to let those whatever beliefs that I had go.
Mhm.
And I joined. And when I first started, everybody was very supportive, and it was great because it was only like 4 of us, which I really enjoy.
Oh, nice.
Getting to know each other, really get to know each other and encourage one another. And I don't think I know that I didn't believe I was, even when I joined, I'm like, yeah, I'm still never going to be able to write a whole book. And they're like, what's your goal for 12 weeks? And everyone's, I want to finish my manuscript. And I was like, holy crap. So I
My goal
said
is
it.
to start a book.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So when I got a certain amount in, I thought, or when I really got clarity of what it was going to look like and I just had to fill in the blanks, which was basically write it all. I said, I think I'm doing this.
Mm.
And I wrote it when Gary was dying.
Mm.
I made sure like it was just what my therapist said, but I had to make sure it happened. I would get up and write at 5:30 in the morning when he was sleeping. I would, if he was in the hospital, I brought my stuff to the hospital, and when he was sleeping or went for a test, I wrote then.
Okay.
If we were home, sometimes in the middle of the afternoon, I'd be like, I'm going upstairs for an hour. Don't bother me unless it's an emergency. So I really prioritized it, and it did. It was very therapeutic. Besides the writing process, just having the excitement of doing something, learning something new, doing
Yeah.
something new, and having something just for myself like that. It did. It turned out to be the best therapy I could have imagined. And when he died, I was like 3 chapters shy of finishing.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I interviewed an author on here a few episodes ago, and she said she wrote her first book for herself. She said,
Mm.
I didn't write it for everyone else. I wrote it for myself. And it was a very therapeutic journey for her as well, something she really needed at the time as well. What was the name of the book that you,
Oh, the first one
the
is
first
called
one?
On Second Thought, Maybe I Can.
And what was it about?
It's my memoir,
Okay. So your life story.
my life story, not all my life story, but the highlight reel.
Mhm.
And so it's broken into 3 parts. So the first is how I developed my limiting beliefs, a lot about my weight and self-worth and judgment and all of that stuff. And then the middle part is a lot of the really nitty-gritty battle years of things we've discussed: infertility, being a caregiver, having the miscarriage, when we moved here and started our insurance agency, like all the struggles that I
Yeah.
faced. And then the last part is what happened since my aha moment at 50.
Wow.
So it's just stories. It is meant to be inspirational. Talking about imposter syndrome, when I first sat to write it, before I wrote it, I said, who's going to want to read this? Because it's not anything crazy. It's not like I was, thank goodness, not kidnapped or
Right.
dismembered. So it's just regular stuff. And then someone said, can you relate to someone who was kidnapped? And I said, no. But
Mm.
can you relate to someone with regular struggles? Yeah. So
Yeah.
that kind of made sense to me. When I was writing it, one of the decisions I had to make is, and I didn't even know the difference of what type. Is it going to be a memoir? Is it going to be a self-help book? Is it going to be a biography? And I did make a conscious effort. You know how sometimes people tell the story and then at the end of the chapter, they'll tell you what they learned from it
Yeah.
or looking back. So I decided not to do that. Just the story all together, you take it for what it's worth. But then people were saying to me, you made all these changes after 50. What'd you do? And
Oh,
so that led to the second book.
okay. And tell us about the second book.
So the second book is called The Sprinkle Effect, A Guide to Living a More Colorful and Fulfilling Life. And the idea is the sprinkles are like rainbow sprinkles, because I love rainbow sprinkles and ice
Love
cream.
rainbow sprinkles.
They're just so happy. And like the title says, it makes everything more colorful and fulfilling, right? It's so much
Yeah.
fun much more fun to eat ice cream with sprinkles on it
And
than
especially rainbow sprinkles. The
rainbow.
chocolate
Oh yeah.
sprinkles aren't the same.
No, they're not. No, they're not. 1,000%.
Yeah.
So you can, if you sprinkle your life
Mm.
with my sprinkles, then you can slowly change your life one sprinkle at a
Mm.
time. And so there's, in this book, you never know, because there's a lot more sprinkles than what I wrote about, but there's 15. And some of them are a sprinkle of belief, a sprinkle of mindset, a
Mm.
sprinkle of responsibility, of action, discipline, resilience, joy, curiosity. So things like that.
Yeah.
And so this is more, I still tell stories in this, but then I give you practical exercises and journal prompts to complete.
Okay.
And I'm a little bit of a nag in the book because I myself, when I'm reading a book like that and there's the activities, I'll just read it and I'll just think about it. Or I'm not going to take out a pen and paper,
Mm.
right? It's no, I just want to move on to the next thing. And so I totally get it. But any change that I've had has only been from actually doing the work,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
There's no other way.
Yeah.
And I don't know why we think it's so torturous, but it is.
It's true. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to go on a healing journey. It's hard to face the hard crap. It's not easy. And
No.
I do think that some people maybe look at somebody who's on the other side of their healing journey and they're like, you made it through. I don't know if I'm going to, but it's hard for everyone. It's not an easy walk at all. And
No.
to face the hard stuff is hard, but that's how you get through it. You can't suppress it. You can't ignore it. You won't get through it. You won't. Oh,
And if you do, then you'll be scarred for life and it'll
yeah.
forever affect you.
Yeah. But the sprinkle effect just came out, right? Is that
Yesterday.
Oh,
Yesterday.
oh wow. So at the time we're recording this, I think I'm a little backed up on my releases here, so it'll be a few
Makes no
weeks
difference.
before it
It'll
comes
still be
out,
out.
but yes, and we'll definitely link how to get it in the show notes and all of
Thank
that
you.
stuff too. And I'm intrigued. I want to read it. So, Debbie, thank you for sharing all of this.
I'll tell you, I don't know what it is with you, but I think you had me share more. I just feel like I spilled my guts. I hope it was helpful to other people because
Yeah.
I do feel like I just went through a therapy session.
Oh, hey, I am not a certified therapist, just for anyone listening.
Yeah, yes,
But
I know.
but I have been a hairdresser for 20 years. And so I have learned to listen to
Yes.
everybody.
Oh my gosh.
And the whole point in me doing this podcast is to share these stories so that people feel less alone and find some camaraderie in it, even though
Yeah.
that sounds weird, camaraderie in our struggles. But I know through my infertility journey, I felt very alone and in a dark place so many times. And listening to podcasts like this or being in Facebook groups and things like that to learn that you're not alone and other people are struggling with many different things brought me a lot of comfort to know I wasn't the only one. Because you feel like that. You feel so much like that when you're going through it.
Especially because if you're not around other people, like in your physical environment, in your friend circle or your family.
Yeah.
And I think for me, I think online, that has been literally the gift of Zoom and the pandemic, because now there's so many online support groups.
Yeah.
And for me at the time, mental illness was what I needed for family members. And it saved me. It saved me because that was a safe place where everybody else understood
Yeah.
what I was talking about, what I was going through. They could give helpful tips or whatever it was. And so it's so great pretty much for anything that we all have access to that. So even if you can't find your community locally, I'm sure you can find it online.
And try a few different things, because I know through my infertility stuff, I jumped into Facebook groups and stuff, and there were a few of them that did not fit well. So if you do find one on there that's doesn't feel right or doesn't feel like the right fit, keep looking, because I think there's so many. And actually in the chapter that I'm in now, I am discovering an entire group of people that is child-free, not by choice. And I had no idea that was even a thing.
Oh, that's awesome.
So there are support groups for that. I don't know. I came across the term at one point and then I just started searching it on Facebook, and I'm in a few groups, and then I've met so many amazing people through Instagram and stuff like that too. That community is pretty incredible as well. And I know I'm not on TikTok very well, but I think that's the newer version of finding that kind of stuff. So I'm sure there's community there too. So
yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Good point. It's not a one
Well,
size fits all.
What's that?
It's not a one size fits all with
Yeah.
the groups. It's good not to be discouraged because you have a bad experience. And
Yeah, for example, I struggle now. I can't be in the infertility groups now because
Yeah.
you have all these people that are just beginning their journeys into IVF or treatments or whatever. And I really struggle watching some of those posts coming up, and then people posting when they've had success and stuff like that. And so I had to remove myself from those groups, but they did serve a purpose for the time being when
Yeah.
I was in that chapter.
Exactly.
Sure. So try other things would be my advice for anyone listening that hasn't jumped into any of that stuff. But do you have any parting words, maybe for somebody who's currently a caregiver or struggling with not giving themselves love and stuff like that? What final words and thoughts do you have on that?
I think that I would just reiterate, or actually, I'll give you my favorite quote that I'm sure everyone who's listening has heard it a million times, and I had heard it a million times. And then one day I heard it and I heard it differently.
Mm.
So it's from Perfect Timing with Wicked coming out. It's from Glinda the Good Witch in The Wizard of Oz, who said, "You've always had the power, my dear. You just had to learn it for yourself."
Mm.
And I always took it as, yeah, Dorothy, you just clicked your heels and say there's no place like home. You would have gotten back there.
Mm.
But really, for any of us, regardless if you're exhausted and you're a caregiver and you're or a widow or infertility, it doesn't make a difference what your poison is, so to speak.
Yeah.
You have the power inside of you
Mm-hmm.
to start making a change. I'm not saying that you could change your life 360, but if you start making small steps, first figuring out where it is you want to go, and then start making small steps, such small steps
Yeah.
that are easy to do, you will immediately start to feel better. Because sometimes we just sit in our sorrow and our pity, and it feels hopeless.
Yeah.
And all it just takes is like that little twist or that little, some little shift. And again, it doesn't have to be big.
Mm. And I think that's important too, because I think a lot of people looking into a healing type journey are overwhelmed, right? It
Yes.
seems like a huge task, but little steps make a huge difference.
They
So,
add up.
mm, thank you so much for
Thank you.
sharing everything that you've shared. I am honored that you felt comfortable enough to share some stories you haven't shared publicly before. So thank you for that so much. And thank you for coming on and sharing your story. And again, I will link all the ways to get a hold of Deb in the notes, show notes. So where to buy the book, where to get a hold of her on Facebook, Instagram, wherever. And I think you have a website as well. Is that right? Yep. So all that's in the show notes if you want to get a hold of her and work with her or read her book, which I think is going to go on my to-do list. So thank you so much, Deb, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. And thank you everyone for listening. We'll see you on the next episode.